So today is a special day because you know what? We're going to take down that reign of normalcy. Yes, take it down. And I'm not doing this by myself because you know, when we work together, things really get done in a much more positive way. So I'm so happy that you can be with us today. We're going to be talking about ableism, which is not a topic I think that gets discussed as much as it needs to. And so if you are new to our show, welcome. I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a retired teacher, a parent, an advocate, a variety of hats like all of us. But I'm especially passionate about making sure that our children get the education that they deserve. And we have a special guest with us today. Taina is here with us, and she's going to be sharing her experience, the knowledge that she's gotten, especially from adults with disabilities or disabled adults. And we'll be talking about those two ways of looking at things. But Dinah is going to share some information with us. She's got some just some slides that will have in-depth information, so it will be great for you to go back and to review as you watch the replay. If you are here with us live, say hi, where you're from, so we can get connected. And Dinah, why don't you tell us some interesting things? I know you're the founder of Inclusion for All, which
Yes.
is a wonderful community on Facebook, and you guys do excellent work with other families. And you also are a parent of a disabled child. So I can't wait to learn more from you today.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is great. I am going to start sharing my uh, PowerPoint. There we go. And yes, so I'm going to introduce myself. My name's Taina Karru-Olsen, and while I am a parent of a wonderful disabled little girl who is in kindergarten at the moment, I am also one of the founding members of Inclusion for All. We are a grassroots cross-disability advocacy network. Really, sort of, we have no official leadership, but we are here for each other in Washington State and really working very hard currently in K to 12 education for inclusive education for all. And we try really hard to be a very disability proud space and have as our founding values disability pride, disability rights, and disability justice. So we try to take our lead from the disability community, disabled adults, and be less of a, while we are largely a parent network, kind of really try to be good parent allies. Should we jump in and start talking about ableism?
Yes, I'd love you to.
All right. So there's ableism. I mean, at least now we talk about it. At least my spell check still does not recognize the word.
Huh.
So that tells you how we maybe should be talking about it more. But it is a very, there is a way of defining it that is sort of generally accepted. And that definition has to do with practices and attitudes in society that devalue and limit disabled folks and that assign inferior value. And it's often because of the way that we all grew up, because it's so pervasive in society, it's not, a lot of it is not intentional. So when we talk about ableism, we're not just talking about like overtly ableist acts, like not letting, somebody join something because they're disabled, although that happens a lot. But a lot of it is just the way that we think about disability, that our belief systems are they're still very entrenched in ableism. And there are quite a few different types of ableism. And what I wanted to kind of talk more about today is what's really important for parents to understand is internalized ableism, because that is something that unless we are so very careful all the time and reflect on what we do and how we are and how we view disability, we are in such great danger of bringing up little kids who will grow up to be disabled adults who think that they're broken or can't accept themselves. And that's, I mean, that is just a horrifying thing, right? Um,
Yeah, exactly. And I think even when our kids are young, they hear the language that we use, and that they, like you said, they do internalize that. So we
yeah,
as parents have to watch how we describe our kids, and
yeah, yeah. And it's not only internalized ableism, it doesn't come just from sort of the language, even though that's a big part of it. And you and I talked before about why I use identity first language. I say disabled instead of person with a disability because I'm trying to take my cue from the larger consensus from the disability community that they would like to be called disabled instead of a person with a disability. Although a personal preference is also always a personal preference, which is important to recognize. So that's why I still use a person with Down syndrome, because that's the preference of the adult Down syndrome community. Um, yes, and I lost my track.
I'm sorry.
No, but we're talking about the different kinds of yes, different kinds of ableism, but we were also talking about how it's not just the, the language that we use, but it's also, I mean, because ableism is very in everything. So when sometimes we can have the best of intentions as parents, and obviously we love our kids, and we want them to, be able to find friends and succeed and have, wonderful lives. And sometimes what bleeds into that are these ableist thoughts about how can we try to make our kids fit in better. And then we don't stop to realize what's actually going on, like where how we might be doing things in a way that gives the message to our children that they're broken or that they need to be fixed, which takes me to a thing that always needs to be discussed when we are talking about ableism. Because while we can talk about ableism and decide that we're going to stop being ableist and we're going to advocate against ableism, something needs to take its place. And that taking its place is acceptance. And I try to put sources in my slides, and I have modified this wonderful list of what acceptance means from Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, because theirs was autism specific, but it's really a great way of looking at how do we actively accept all disabled people. And in essence, when we do acceptance, because it is something that we actively do and not just sort of decide, hey, now I'm going to accept everybody. It really is, we acknowledge disabled people as a distinct minority group, which is very important because often when we talk about, larger societal inclusion and diversity, we don't include disabled people as a distinct minority, although it's the largest minority in the United States. We also have to sort of accept disabled ways of being as different, legitimate, meaningful, and valuable ways of being. So not just different, but legitimate, meaningful, and valuable. Those are really important words. So that we're not just kind of going, oh yes, you're too different, but I still accept you. but that there's real value in that difference. And it's a legitimate way of being, even when it seems like it's very different from my own way of being. And we really have to believe that disabled people do not need to be cured. That's sort of, that is really important. And that ties to, while we actively accept so that disabled people don't need to be cured or don't need to become more normal, we are getting rid of that. That doesn't mean that disabled people don't need to be supported and facilitated to really have good lives in today's society, because clearly we have built a very ableist society. So while we're changing that, acceptance does not mean that we just say, okay, fine, just exist however you are, just go on existing. We do need to support and facilitate, accommodate, all that good stuff. Yes, that was sort of my soapbox on acceptance, actively accepting.
Well, and I think, we hear more about this kind of debate between acceptance, awareness, when we have things like, Autism Awareness Month or something. And that there is a huge difference between awareness and acceptance, and how this, I think, I love how you talk about different legitimate, meaningful, and valuable ways of disabled people having experienced the world. And that definition of acceptance, I think, shows us the big difference between just awareness and acceptance. I don't think our goal is awareness.
No, and awareness it's so often sort of finds a place where we make our kids the cause instead of active participants in their liberation. They become this cause. And there are many wonderful autistic activists and their allies who call the month of April the Bewareness Month. Because it's so often it comes off as like awareness is something scary, of something that we need to eradicate. And I know it's not always that, but it's kind of a tricky thing that we're trying to do. So we might as well just plow straight through it onto acceptance.
Right.
Because I mean, we are being radical, so. Although we didn't have to be.
I know. That's okay, though.
All right, and then this is sort of, we can't talk about ableism or acceptance or special education and how those two connect without talking about the medical model and the social model of disability. Because ableism is it's part of medical model thinking, and how that ties into inclusive education and special education is that special education has its roots in the medical model of disability.
Right.
And the medical model of disability really locates disability as a problem in an individual. So we need to kind of fix that person. There's something wrong with the person. We need to either remediate the symptoms, or we need to root out the cause of that wrongness. Whereas the social model of disability, and this is sort of a crude juxtaposition. These are not the only models. These are not, my description is not very defined or refined. But the social model of disability locates disablement as a problem, not a problem, but a problem, using air quotes, in the environment. So it really starts from a very different place. So it recognizes the ableist society that we have created by putting in place structures and policies, attitudes, and environments that just are not designed for everybody, that are not designed for the kind of diverse population that we have. And it's it is very beneficial when we talk about inclusive education that we sort of position those conversations in the social model of disability so that it becomes the environment, that the instruction that needs to shift and evolve. And that can be done through things like universal design for learning in a really wonderful way. But that's kind of where, if we keep trying to talk about inclusive education while we're in the medical model of disability, there's always going to be it's always just going to not fit, because the medical model of disability says that there's some sort of normal, that if you cannot be that normal, then we have to do something different for you. So if we're trying to use that framework and have a child included in education, it's never going to fit. It's that round peg in a square hole, or square peg in a round hole. Yeah, I always forget which one it is.
I know. I think they both work.
Yeah,
both
exactly. Neither one is perfect. It's a good fit. But so it's important to always, when we talk about these concepts, to understand the difference between the medical model and the social model of disability, because individual or environment, that's sort of where it always is going to be. And which makes me leap to a very different thing, although it's really connected also. But I mean, I guess I'm just not very good at PowerPoints. My mind leaps in ways that are unprecedented.
That's okay.
But it's often when we talk about, ableism and acceptance and all this, we always end up also talking about independence. And on this slide, I have given you 2 quotes from Lydia Brown. They are a wonderful activist, scholar. They write a lot about ableism. They write a lot about disability. And I've seen them present a couple of times, and it always blows my mind. But I've given you a couple of quotes about interdependence, because that's really what we're talking about when we talk about independence. Because we justify a lot of things that we do to our disabled kids and that we do to disabled people by talking about independence and the need for independence. And what we don't realize is that actually we are all interdependent. And we have such immense amount of privilege to not have to recognize how interdependent we are as non-disabled individuals. Because we are really interdependent, and we rely on systems and a world that is designed for us. None of us is independent. And this quote I could not find in writing anywhere, but I have been to a presentation where Lydia Brown said this: no one is independent, but everyone has autonomy. And that is a very good starting point for looking at disability and looking at being human. I mean, which part of having a disability is part of being human. Because what we're doing right now is that we're taking this immense privilege of not having to acknowledge that we're all interdependent and pretending like we're independent and saying, oh, no, because you're not independent like I am, you diverge too much. So this being independent should be a goal for you. And if you cannot reach that goal, then you're not going to have autonomy and self-determination. That you won't be able to make decisions about your own life because you're not independent. And it comes from that ableist medical model thinking. And I've noticed part of it is also because we are a very individualist society, and we like to pretend like we're independent. But it hurts us all, but really our kids. because we keep confusing independence with self-determination and autonomy. And those are something that you have because you are a human, you have autonomy, and you can be self-determined. And you don't need to be independent to have that. And I'm going to sort of circle into something that I feel is important to mention when we talk about autonomy and self-determination. And I mean, I've listed things that kind of undermine, that prop up ideas about normalcy and average and undermine disabled folks' autonomy and self-determination. It's, not defined by disability. They were able to do this and not be defined by their disability. But really, disability can be its community, its identity. It's acceptance to be defined by disability in a good way. So it's sort of that meaningful and valuable way of being. But what's really important is when we talk about autonomy and self-determination, and I realize I'm being super rambly and jumbly here.
No, people are loving what you're saying. You've got lots of live viewers here.
Okay.
So, yes, they appreciate you.
But when we talk about these autonomy and self-determination, and when we confuse those with independence, and when we strive for independence, we end up doing things like, in ABA, intense therapies, we search for therapeutics, we use vitamins and supplements because we're coming from that ableist point that in order for there to be more independence, we need to more autonomy, more self-determination. We need to somehow fix an individual. And what I really want to be clear about is that this is all part of a fixer narrative that also ties into internalized ableism. And if we're trying to bring up our kids without internalized ableism, we have to look at whether we're sort of implicitly trying to fix them or not. So whether we're supporting or whether we're trying to fix. And I want to be very clear about things like ABA is that at best, these interventions are harmless to the recipient, but they only undermine acceptance work. And at worst, in a lot of the cases, in some cases like with ABA, these interventions are incredibly harmful to the individual, have lifelong consequences, and they undermine acceptance work. So it's not just, we're not just kind of, we don't just have the danger of, raising our kids with internalized ableism. We are making some, we're being harmful. We're, on one hand, we're telling them that they need to be fixed, they're broken, they need to fit in better. And on the other hand, we are we're scarring them for life. And and I want to be clear, we're doing that with the best of intentions often. Right. We're doing that because we love our kids. But if we don't always stop and consider the impact, not just the intentions, or if we don't always consider the impact, not the intentions, and if we don't reflect on the impact constantly, we can mold people who will not have that good life that we want them to have. Yes.
And this is a part that I think is really, parents, especially new parents, get so many different messages from their friends, their family, medical personnel, which of course are going to come from that medical model, different teachers, different therapists. And I think it's so hard for parents to sort through that and come from a place of, how are we going to make sure that our child feels confident in their abilities, that they can contribute things to our communities? So, do you have any advice about how parents sort through all those mixed messages that they'll
Yeah,
be getting?
I think what really, and this is going to be one of the sort of, I have a final slide that is like, well, what do we do now? What is our shared work? One of the really important things is, and that does not get said, cannot be said too much, is that we have to seek out disabled people. We have to seek out disabled adults who have chosen to lead, who have made themselves a bit like not just hunt down a random person in a wheelchair and start asking them questions. But we have to, there are so many disabled activists and leaders who have either personally or through their work who have chosen to lead. So we can seek out what they say about what they when they talk about their own lives and when they talk about what's happening in their community. I think those are, if we continue to seek those people out and take our leadership from them, then we don't have to worry about, I mean, I think it's important to say that we can actually completely disregard some doctors. You know, they may be able to talk about medicine, but we don't have to take advice from them about how we should view disability in society. So it's really important to be like, we almost have to give those new parents permission to not have to worry about some of that advice and to really create, and we as parents, we can be the parents who can kind of reach out to the new parents and say, you don't have to listen to those moms in that group. um, because so much of like sometimes you just get sucked into those situations and then you think that that's all there is. So we can also, and that's a really good way to be a parent ally, is to reach out to other parents and kind of not in, because I know there's a lot of support that happens, and that is important too. But we really, that support can also be telling somebody, you're really not going a good way right now. And I know that that's not a very accepted thing to say. And I often get called out for, like, well, you always talk about acceptance and inclusion, and then you're not accepting and including all of the parents. And I always make the difference that we don't have to accept and include oppressive or abusive um, ideology or message. So, that is not part of accepting and including everybody,
Um,
is we don't have to accept that kind of ideology when we know that that's not what the disability community advocates for. So we can take our leadership from there and then kind of say, this is who we're listening to because they know what they're talking about. And this is what I can share with you as a parent because I'm listening to these disabled folks talk about their experiences. So I always also say, and I think it's maybe, yes, it's in this slide, is that while we are the experts in our kids' everyday lives, like I know what my kid likes to eat, and that's where I'm an expert. So like when I go into an IEP meeting, I can talk about those things and be the expert in my child's everyday life, but I'm still not an expert in her disability or how that makes her experience the world. So because I don't share her disability. So only by looking to adults who share her disability can I sort of get a glimpse of what the world looks like to her and how she experiences it. And I think that's an important difference that we also have to make, because sometimes the parent community kind of slips into that, well, we know what's best for our kids mode. Because, I mean, we know what's best for them, in regards to things like eating and sleeping and, you know, how you should not hit your brother. Those kinds of things. But we have to be intentional about seeking out disabled folks and let them guide us on how our kids are experiencing the world. Yes, and now I've, circled back to something completely different again, as happens. But I am at a different slide that's also about how we're being parent allies. And I think I already said this before, but I'm going to say it again, nothing about us without us. So we don't, as parents, even though we advocate, yes, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't advocate. Yes, obviously we have to keep advocating, but we can't center ourselves in that. So it's really, we have to center disabled people and our own children on their own terms, so that we really truly try to be the best allies. And I know, like, allies can't say that they're allies, so it comes from what you do. But part of it is that if you're trying to be an ally, is that you don't center yourself. And I think that's sort of, in the parent community, that gets lost a lot. Yes.
Yeah, I think for sure is, making sure that our child is the center, right? And that we take those lessons that we learn from disabled adults. And they have such powerful messages. I mean, if you listen to Norman Kuntz and other disability rights activists of describing what it was like for them to, go to physical therapy, describing what it's like to miss out on seeing the volcano erupt in your classroom because you were in the resource room instead, like Doug Fisher talks about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think your message of the leaders are the disabled adults. We know our children on some levels, but we still need to listen and incorporate the teachings that others have shown us.
Yeah, exactly. It's because disabled adults are our children's community also. I mean, everybody has multiple communities, but that's a really important, they're the ones who can encourage that positive formation of an identity that includes disability, and really sort of, they are the community. And a point that I really want to always make when I talk about this is that inclusion doesn't mean that we deny that community from our children. But it means that the system cannot dictate that that's their only community, or that they have to be in that community at certain points in time, which is kind of what's happening right now. But we can have really successful inclusive education, and still our children can have their disability community. And those don't sort of cancel each other out.
Yeah, and I think, you bring up a really important point, because my son was totally included from, preschool through auditing college classes. And because of that, he never really developed an identity with a community of other people with Down syndrome. And so now, as an adult, he's 29 years old, when people try to say, well, why don't you do this activity or this activity, and it's mainly a segregated activity for only disabled adults, he that's not what he chooses to do. In
Yeah.
the way that he explains it, which is interesting, is he says, well, I don't want to be around people with my DNA. So it's like, what was, where did
Yeah.
I go wrong as a parent? Because it's like, Dylan, this is exactly what we're talking about for you. And now, so yeah, I just wonder about that balance, I guess, between, allowing our kids to identify with their disability, having a community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that part I
Yeah.
never really thought about when he was younger, you
Yeah,
know?
I think that's where it really, that's why it sort of, it punches me every time somebody says, or I read somewhere that this person was not letting their disability define them. Because what I learned from the people who are really comfortable in their identities, who are disabled, are the people who do define, like, that is a big part of their identity. And they identify as disability rights activists. Um, and that's kind of, I'm very intentional now with my child that we talk about how she has Down syndrome, and we talk about how her best friend has Down syndrome. But we also talk about how her other best friend does not have Down syndrome. Um, and we kind of, I mean, it's a tricky thing, and I'm not saying I'm by any means doing it correctly, because I think we're all just kind of moving along in our own way and trying to navigate the space. But I do try to think about it a lot of what I'm telling her about disability and what kind of messages she's getting about it so that she can be comfortable in it and comfortable around people who share her exact disability and other disabled people, and how she can also actively accept herself and other disabled people.
Right.
So although I'm such, like, the things that I advocate for most is inclusive education, it's really where the sticking point is, that why I don't like segregated spaces are because then that's the system telling her what where she belongs. It's not her deciding where she belongs.
Right.
So there are ways of, I feel like there are plenty of ways to offer that community to her and try to be a part of that community. And she's going to do more of it. Right now, it's like I have to organize to be a part of the community, obviously,
Right.
because I mean she can't drive, so although she would love to, but like she can't sort of. I can't present her with like, do you want to go do this thing and then have her go? So I have to organize that, being part of that community. But I also try to very much do it so that I try to give her the chance to pick the people that she wants to hang out with, and then I will just have to make do with their parents, so that I'm not just like picking and choosing the ones that I like the parents of. Although I have been very lucky. I've been very lucky. But I feel like it is a balancing act, but I feel that there are ways of doing it successfully, but we have to be very intentional about it. So that like I don't, in 10 years I don't think, oh, I should have done more.
Right.
I should have done this, or that I know I will never regret pushing for inclusive education. I will never regret that.
Right.
That I know, but I may regret not being pushy enough about those community spaces. Um, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Um, see. Oh yeah. And then I have some other things that are kind of, and these go back to internalized ableism, and these go back to things that come from ableist thinking. And I want to make sure that what we're doing with time. Um, so, and now I'm talking to other parents like myself. Um, And what's really important is that we need to understand how big a part we have in shaping the conversation and shaping the environments. So when I'm trying to be intentional about inclusive education and creating community spaces, we also need to be intentional about how we are the front line of unconditional acceptance and inclusion. So there are certain things that need to always be mentioned, like when we say that we hate the disability but love the child, that comes from such an ableist place. That comes from the medical model that cannot end well.
Right.
And this, I always get sort of clap back for this, but I am not a huge fan of more alike than different. And here's my reasoning, is that if we're really truly celebrating diversity and difference, and if we're really truly looking at creating new value around disability, we can't push angles like more alike than different. Those two things don't coexist. I get where the intention is, but I don't know that and the immediate result might be something that we like to see because it gets us to a more inclusive place. But I don't know that the long-term effects the outcomes, the real impact is going to be, I don't know that it's helping us. I don't think it's helping us.
And that, and I think that is like so interesting. And that's why I love to hear you talk, Dinah, because that helps me push my thinking. And so I think as an advocate, one of the things that I try to do is find common ground between the parents and the school system when there's conflict. Yes. And that's like I don't know, just a value and a strategy that I have. And so then I look at when I talk about how kids are more alike than different, then I'm kind of using that same strategy of finding out like what's the common ground here. And so now you're challenging my thinking, which is good because I want to learn more and I want to understand more. And so what I hear you saying is when we say things like we're more alike than we're different, that we're kind of dissing that disabled part that makes us, makes our kids unique. Or so I don't know. Can you just like maybe talk another couple minutes about that? Because
yes.
I want to solidify that in my brain, and I think that would help the viewers too.
Yeah. So this ties back into the way that we're trying to actively accept everybody, is that we are celebrating difference, that we are celebrating difference that is so great that it almost seems sort of insurmountable. So because we have as human beings, and now I'm going to go off on like a neuroscience thing, which I did not prepare for, so nobody can quote me on this. We have two kinds of empathies that we are able to do. And there's something where we are able to, like, we feel the empathy because we can sort of almost physically, we can put ourselves in that place and feel the pain. But then we also have something, and I do believe that this one's called cognitive empathy, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I will have to check on that later, which allows for us to look at somebody's situation who is extremely different from us, where the situation is something that we could never be in. And we can still have that empathy towards them because we can think our way to it.
Right.
And I think this is where true disability acceptance comes in. This is where true sort of, this is the way that we have to think about, because there's no way that I, as a white woman who grew up in Finland, can ever understand the experience of a Black woman who grew up in the United States. There's no way that I can't ever even begin to own that experience.
Right.
But I can sort of think my way to what I need to do for her to not have those negative experiences. So I can actively advocate for her rights and for her future. And I feel the same so when we desperately look for that common ground, I think what we lose is other people's ability and our, non-disabled people's ability to really think their way to acceptance, even when they can't really, because we get into trouble when we try to take on the disabled experience. I mean, and we see that with things like disability simulations that turn out that we thought that they were a good thing, that they were opening people's eyes to what it's like to live with a disability. And now we find out that they actually engender pity.
Right.
And they can be very damaging. So it's the same thing is like when we're desperate to find common ground, it's okay for that common ground to not exist. That doesn't have to mean that we can't actively accept and include somebody. So that's sort of, we need to celebrate when something is really different. We need to celebrate that difference. And we need to see the value in it. And we need to see how meaningful it is. So that we don't, it's kind of like, I feel like it's almost too easy to try to look for those common things, because then you're sort of trying to go where the bar is the lowest. And that's why I say that I get why we do it, because it gets us sort of more immediate results. But if we really look at the long term, we want to have a diverse society that has such diversity, such sort of a scale or a spectrum of existence, that there's no way that the ends can, try to embody each other's experiences. But they still can coexist, that they still can sort of, the ground can still be level.
Right. So I think this will be definitely a video that parents will want to go back and rewatch, because I think what you're saying is like Nancy is on with us from Colorado, and she just said that was all beautifully expressed. And so Nancy really appreciates your way of expressing that and defining that for us. And I think, like I said, because it seems foreign, it seems it doesn't come naturally, it doesn't seem to flow for some of the things that we're talking about today. So I really encourage people to go back and watch the replay. The other thing I wanted to mention, Dinah, was somebody had asked if they can have access to the PowerPoint slides, or just through the replay they can go back and see them again. I
Yes.
didn't know what your preference was.
Yeah, I can put these into a PDF, and then I've tried to put in where I've specifically had sources where I took the material. I've tried to put those sources in the slides. But I mean, and I want to be clear that none of this is like my original thinking.
Right.
This all comes from disabled adults whose shoulders I'm standing on. And I'm only allowing myself to do this because I feel like as a parent, I should be talking to other parents about these things, so that it's not the labor of disabled folks who have to like constantly try to reach out to parents for that partnership. So I mean, because otherwise I feel like it's sort of a non-disabled person talking about ableism, isn't it?
I know. what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah, but I
But
do feel like there's a parent role in this, reaching out to other parents.
right. And Ricky is on with us, and she says, I agree, more alike than different. We are all individuals and therefore are all different. I think the slogan came out of a need to address the notion that people with Down syndrome somehow don't have the same range of needs, dreams, etc. as their peers. However, once we make that point, we do have to move on from there.
Yeah. And I feel like, and what I'm always talking about is that I never want to question people's intentions. Because I mean, nobody comes at this sort of advocacy work maliciously.
Right,
Like we're all just trying to figure out ways to forward forward things like inclusion and acceptance. But
right,
we do need to, what I always find myself missing in a lot of the conversations is that we're not really constantly reflecting back on like what the longer term outcomes are and whether we should be kind of transitioning away from something into something new and more kind of we we can't rest on our laurels when we've like accomplished a certain thing, so that we do need to always move forward. um, and I know it sometimes that comes off as like me being hypercritical about everything, but I mean somebody has to do that.
that's right. That's your role in life.
Yeah. um, and I'm thinking about if there's I wanted to make a couple more points, and I specifically put some things in this slide about the grief narrative, and I want to make sure that everybody understands what that means. So that's I once attended a support parent training. Imagine that. Somebody was going to let me be a support parent. Where I was told about the stages of grief, and it was kind of made to sound like naturally parents, when they have a disabled child, when they give birth to a disabled child or their child gets a diagnosis, naturally they're going to grieve. And I sat there and I thought, well, that doesn't sound right. Are you now telling me that I have to go to other parents and tell them, oh, you should grieve. It's okay, you should grieve. Um, and when I mean that we need to, when I say that we need to intentionally disrupt the grief narrative, what I mean is that when we are given the opportunity, is that we can validate feelings should they rise naturally, but we don't have to act as if grieving, having a disabled child is a normal part of parenthood to a disabled kid. Um, and we also have to make we have to draw a line between grieving the disability and being afraid for the kid's future. There's a sort of there's a good divide there, because we can acknowledge that our society, our school system, everything, nothing was designed for disabled people in mind. So once we have a disabled child, I mean, obviously it can feel daunting. Like, what is school going to look like? Are they going to accept my kid in the kindergarten classroom? Is my child going to be able to go to high school in regular classes? Are they going to have friends? Those are sort of natural concerns, and that's not part of the grief narrative. Um, but that's not because of the disability. That's because of the society. So
Right.
if we are able to early on make that clear to new parents or parents whose children have just received diagnosis, that's a really powerful thing to kind of make them understand that while they might have these feelings, it's not the disability, it's the society.
And I look at, a lot of different parent organizations that will have either literature or, welcome baskets that they take to new parents in the hospital. And that, what we first say to parents that are new or, what we first give them to read, think of the impact that's going to have on them. So instead, if we could talk about what you were just explaining, I think so many more parents would, have a different outlook and
Yeah,
know where to put their concerns and know that, you know, this is a beautiful child that's going to have a
yeah,
wonderful life
yeah,
because we're going to make sure that happens,
yeah, yeah. It's like instead of saying we have these parents here to support you through this grieving period, we can say we have these parents who have such great expertise in navigating the school system, and we have these parents who can, get you. We can get you connected, and we can show you that your child has a community. Your child has a community when they're a toddler, and your child has a community when they're an adult. And they can be a meaningful, powerful part of that community. And they're going to be a part of the larger community, but they also that they have that disability community where they are a meaningful part of it.
And it seems like it comes down to so many times in our culture we have either or thinking versus and thinking.
Yeah,
So I think maybe that's where I have come from. I first got training as a special ed teacher in the 70s, so we know what that model was.
yeah,
And I've evolved, luckily, but I still need to evolve more. But I think of looking at it's not either your child is included or your child is segregated. It's not like either your child is accepted for who they are
yeah,
or we look at the gifts of their disability, but it's bringing it together and saying all of this
yeah,
is part of who they are.
yeah, yeah. Because I mean, and that goes into something I had slides that we are going to have to skip now, but
So,
I can put this into a PDF and then no, I have no understanding of time. Although I am always early for everything. Uh, but I wanted to talk about some of the things, how ableism and everything connects to special education and inclusive education. Is that this ties into what you were just saying? Is that it doesn't have to look the same or even similar. So we can have inclusive education that is, it's not like we're retrofitting this disabled kid into this existing classroom, but we're changing everything so that it really looks, it looks like we're celebrating diversity, that we're celebrating different kinds of engagement, and we're allowing for different ways of being in the classroom. Um, and I put in some points here about different things. So this is the really super heavy slide that I probably should have broken up at least in three. But I think just moving away from the medical model thinking, and that is hard when special education is still, I mean, I know it's changed since the 70s, but it's still very entrenched in special education is really struggling to come away from um, changing the kids to being sort of being served in a way that is more accessible to everybody.
right.
And I mean, because I mean, I think special education is just having a hard time moving away from being special, just being education.
Right.
Because that's really where it's sort of where it is. But in this, yeah, um, I think for us to really let go of that ableist notion or that ableist notion within education is to just have broader expectations for everybody. I know we always talk about higher expectations, and I always make a point to talk about broader expectations so that we really celebrate different ways of being in the world. Because that's sort of, we really, we're so good at talking about diversity, and we're so good at talking about inclusion, but when it really comes to it, we would just like for everybody to be super normal.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's why, I look back when, after I left being in my former life, I was a special ed teacher, but then I became a classroom teacher. And, one of the things that I loved to do was ask my kids, like, how did you figure that out? Like a math problem or something. And I loved to hear all the different ways that I would have never thought about. And so just those little things that teachers can do, I think, and as parents, to show that our kids that we don't all have to think the same, and look at the wonderful ways each of us are thinking about something and maybe a slight different twist.
Yeah.
And that's something that we want to celebrate. And that's the part that's the message that all kids have to hear, right? Not
Yes.
just
Yes,
disabled
because
kids.
inclusive education is really, like I say here, it's everyone's classroom.
Right.
So it's never just about the disabled kids. It is always about all kids. And I think the more we move into the thinking that it's all kids, the less likely we are to have those ableist stumbles. Because, yeah, and there's still a lot of them, but we are progressing. We are progressing. Um, yeah, so this is my final slide, which is we've pretty much covered everything on here, which is good. But I always do want to leave off with, like, it seems to me that people like action points and next steps. Because I
Right.
mean, if it was just me, I would just keep on talking, and because I love to do that, and just keep on thinking. Um, but there really are some very all pretty concrete ways how we can change things and how we can actively move away from ableism. And it's because it's still, we can actively challenge it and call it out and be in solidarity with other minority movements, so that we really can change things. Um, yes, I think that's my, here's my
Oh,
final
good.
slide with, so if somebody wants to email me, I will occasionally check this email address. Um, and, it's, I want to thank you for giving me this chance to speak to everybody. Um, I do like doing it. So
Well, and if you can come back full screen, so because I know as you've been talking when we're live, your face gets covered up.
yes,
So, but I do appreciate you so much, Dinah, because you have that linguistic intelligence to be able to articulate some ideas that I don't know if they're abstract or if it's just because they're a new way of thinking from how we've been raised, how we've been, kind of taught in our schools, situations. But so I so appreciate you because
thank you.
I feel like I gain a lot when I'm by you, when I'm listening to you, and I'm sure that, the comments that we've had from other viewers are just like they've really appreciated you being with us today. And I love that you have your contact info, and I'll also put that in the description of the video so people can
Okay.
easily do that. The other thing is I do have an article that I had written a while ago about interdependence. And if people want to get a copy of that, they can just type in Able in the comments and you'll
Perfect.
get a copy of that. And then when you put your slides into a PDF, then we can share the link for that also
Yes.
with our viewers. And I so appreciate you. Now that we're kind of close together, Washington and Idaho.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we'll stay connected in other ways too. And I just wanted to kind of end where we started. If people missed the beginning of our video and my handy dandy, because I know this makes Dinah laugh.
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
I appreciate you being here with us today,
Thanks for
all of our
having me.
viewers and the people that will be watching the replay. And, you know, in the past, we've had this reign of normalcy. And guess what, guys? We can take it off and throw that reign down. And I am so looking forward to the exciting possibilities that are going to exist in our communities because of people like you, Dinah. So I appreciate so much for you being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It has been great.
And we shall keep in touch next week. Thursday, I'll have another live show at noon. So come back and watch our additional show. And until next Thursday, I'm Charmaine Tanner, and we shall see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.